didn't even put two and two together that you were on this. Like, I just looked at it differently. I didn't like make the mental connection.
Yeah.
I was like, that's so
That is funny. For how this stuff winds up like this. I feel like Cincinnati is a big enough city. It's a small enough city that you always are seeing people you know, but it's a big enough city that you never expect.
wow. It was beautiful.
Hi. Really?
Man, nice to meet you. Yeah, so nice. I bet you are. Yeah.
What was your name?
Nice to meet you. All
Finley.
right.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, very nice. All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to Cincinnati Museum Center and braving the blizzard to get here. First snow of the year. So, my name is Brian Pollock. I'm the manager of STEM resources here at Cincinnati Museum Center. So I do a lot of our science programming, and I'm part of our program development team. And I have worked with Dr. Nate Morehouse for a few years now, doing some programming with Nate with his jumping spider research. And so we were really excited about the IRiS Alloy series and hosting it here. We waited until we opened our new Advancing Health Gallery. So this is a brand new gallery that we just opened. We're really excited. So anyway, that is why we are here today. But I'm going to turn it over to Nate to introduce himself and talk a little bit about IRiS and the Alloy series, and then we'll get into the rest of it.
Great, thanks, Brian. So I'm Nate Morehouse. I'm the director for the Institute for Research in Sensing at UC. We are an interdisciplinary research center focused on topics related to sensing, perception, and sensor technology development. Those have been subjects that have been a real strength at UC in the science, technology, engineering, mathematics disciplines for a long time, maybe 30 years. But rarely have those conversations brought in people from the humanities, from the fine performing arts, from the social sciences. So one of the things that IRiS does is to bring those strengths in STEM disciplines together with many of the other strengths that we have at UC in non-STEM disciplines to do things like this. This is an annual series. This is our 16th of these. We've done them all over town. We did one in the Lunken Airport Terminal in the middle of COVID. That was interesting. We've done them at the American Sign Museum. We've done them at the Mercantile Library. We'll have 2 coming up this spring. We do 4 of them a year now. They're always free. They're always in an interesting place. We hope they're always on interesting topics. We also run a graduate research fellowship program at UC that accepts students from any discipline to train to think about innovation and interdisciplinary scholarship. A bunch of our IRiS fellows are here from this year. If you're an IRiS fellow, you want to raise your hands? Thanks. Yay, thanks for coming. And we do an annual conference as well called IRiS Ignite, which we're planning for this coming one in 2025 tomorrow. So stay tuned. If you got brought into this by a friend, feel free to look us up, IRiS UC. We'll send you through Google or some other search engine to our website. You can sign up for our mailing list if you want to stay in the know about these kinds of events. So
Great.
Back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Nate. So our title of our discussion tonight is Nociception and the Experience of Pain. So nociception refers to the nervous system signals that result in physical pain, and with rare exception, we all experience this kind of pain. But our experience of pain and with pain is personal and unique, and each of our speakers tonight has their own unique perspective on pain. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of our 5 speakers tonight. And then we'll start off with an opening question that I hope you all can address, and then we'll go from there, however it goes. So immediately to my left, Dr. Neha Santucci is a neurogastroenterologist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, working with young patients facing some of the most challenging medical conditions. Harvey Lewis is an ultramarathon runner with a very impressive list of accomplishments in there, and I'm personally curious to hear your relationship to pain as it relates to running such extreme distances. Finley Smith is a youth disability advocate, offering a perspective on living with and understanding pain. We all enjoyed the music earlier of Bailey Miller, a musician and a graduate researcher in bioethics who draws from her own personal experiences to inform all of these domains. And Catherine Gould, our curator of history objects at Cincinnati Museum Center. And she brought some interesting objects related to medical history and pain, and we'll hear more about that tonight. All right, so our opening question, and we can sort of popcorn this around as we go. Please tell us a bit about the role pain plays in your work or life so we can understand your perspective to the topic a little bit more. I guess I'll just call someone out here to start. So since we already met you with your music earlier, Bailey, would you be willing to start off and tell us a little bit about the role pain plays in your life and in your work?
Yeah, I think it's like kind of a push-pull. I think like on one hand, it is the reason for why I've chosen to do a lot of the things that I've done. And that stems from my experience having two rare spinal cord diseases that were undiagnosed for a very long time, for about 6 years, and possibly my whole life. So I have a very long like medical track record that has kind of like bloomed into a lot of other interests like bioethics, like I'm studying now. So on one hand, pain is like the inspiration for a lot of what I do, and some advocacy that I do. But on the other hand, it's also a restraint and something that I'm always trying to remove from my life. So I think that it's this tension that will never go away.
Thank you. Would you like to go next, Finley?
Yeah, sure. So I have a few chronic pain conditions that affect my life pretty majorly. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, celiac disease, and POTS, which I always forget what it stands for. Mom, do you know?
I would bet a lot of the people know it's post-orthostatic tachycardia syndrome.
Thanks, love you. But they've all kind of, I feel like I don't experience the world and just what it's like to live in a human body in the way that most people do, in a way that's very hard to explain. And I could talk about it for a very long time, which I probably will. But despite everything and despite all the problems it's caused me, I feel like if I had the choice to be born without those conditions, I don't think I would, because I wouldn't have been the same person that I am today. I think that my experience working through having those conditions and just learning how to manage everything at such a young age, because I'm only 19, has made me into a much stronger person than I would have been if I were born able-bodied. And I think that even though it really, really sucks and I hate it a lot of the time, I think it's given me a lot of perspective that has given me kind of a better outlook on life in a lot of ways as well, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Harvey, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I'm a teacher. In fact, Finley is one of my former students. I've got a couple other students over here, which is great. But I'm also an ultra runner, and I won the world championship of last person standing last year, and set a record last year running 450 miles over 4.5 days. And through this experience, I don't take any sort of pain medicine before, during, or after. And I've had to develop like techniques to, I don't even use the word pain, like just discomfort. I've developed techniques to endure that. And I've also had some other experiences in life. I broke my neck back in 2004 and had to have my 5th and 6th vertebrae fused. And so I went through a challenging period to recover from that. And so I've got like a little, definitely different angle of coming at this. And I look forward to just hearing all your different perspectives tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So first three that we've heard from are largely a personal experience of pain and an approach to pain. You are bringing also a professional experience. Obviously, you have personal experiences with pain like we all do, but you have a very, in this panel at least, unique perspective on treating people with pain and pain conditions.
Yes, so I am a pediatric neurogastroenterologist, but my focus is really chronic abdominal pain. So it's a full circle. I see patients with celiac disease, hypermobility, POTS, who not just patients who have irritable bowel syndrome or have a little bit of pain, but it's more, these are kids who are really disabled by their pain. They cannot go to school. They cannot eat. They need tubes when their gut is functioning. Some of them cannot sleep. So really affecting a lot of different domains as a teenager. And then some of my NIH-funded research is now looking at what causes this, what factors affect it, and what can we do about it. So mostly looking at vagal neurostimulation or gut neuromodulation to treat pain. And then on the other side, in the clinical realm, we're trying to come together as a community, partner with schools, partner with communities to largely understand the pain experience that kids are facing, and also provide more non-pharmacologic treatment. So bring a more multidisciplinary approach with a dietitian, with a psychologist, and GI to give the best care we can.
Catherine, you brought some interesting devices with you today. I think when we think about medical care and pain now, we largely think that the goal of medicine is to, at the very least, not cause pain when it can be avoided, and try to reduce it a lot. I know some of your devices over there were probably caused pain and were thought to reduce pain at the same time. So can you provide some perspective on that?
Sure. So in my position, I'm more of a collect and study the material culture of pain management. So what are the things that we've used to try to treat pain over time? So within the collection, it's obvious things like surgical kits, dental tools, medical devices, various things, pharmaceuticals. We have a very large collection of, the patent medicines, the quack medicines. And then we have kind of these quack medical devices over here as well, both of which are using electricity in some way in their claims to reduce pain, but then they kind of expand those claims to include curing tuberculosis and epilepsy and cancer just by waving this light wand over, the afflicted area. So I kind of collect that material culture of trying to manage pain or treat pain. And then in preparing for this, the hole that I realized is in the collection is we have a lot of the practitioner side. I don't have the patient story in the collection. So what is the patient side of pain management or living with pain look like, and what are those material objects that can document and tell those stories?
So I think that's a perfect segue, so that I'm interested to hear from each of you what it is like to deal with pain when you are having pain or when your patients are having pain. What are some strategies that you're using to either accept the pain and deal with it, or reduce the pain? What is your approach to that, and how does it affect you? I suppose when you're having pain like that. So, not sure who'd like to start.
What I've been fairly lucky.
Yeah.
I just have, I think, average life pain,
Sure.
bad feet, sore back. I reached the age where it's almost something new every week.
Sure.
You don't know where that came from. Didn't have that in my 20s or my 30s or my 40s. So it's you're kind of getting into that area. But as far as like dealing with it, I think I'm still at the stage where it's just kind of rest a little bit,
Sure.
deal with it, live with it,
Mhm.
kind of a thing. So I think I've been lucky, with respect to pain in my life, kind of knock on wood.
Yeah. So I can share some of my personal experiences too, that I've had strange pains come up. I had a bout of gastritis that was causing some pain, but it was unpredictable and weird, and I wasn't sure. And I thought every little thing that came up was part of this condition for a long time. And I wasn't even sure when I was better, right? Because you have pains all the time, and some of them indicate things, and some of them don't really, right? Don't indicate an underlying serious condition, right? So that can be difficult and concerning, especially when you have pain in like this area where things are supposed to work. Knee pain is one thing, but pain in here is really concerning sometimes.
Can I make a question?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think to me, one of the most challenging sides of feeling pain is getting other people to be sympathetic with you and understand what you're going on. Because I live with some pain chronic conditions too, and for a long time, people don't realize the level of pain you are feeling, because mostly for you that live with chronic pain or for a long time, you have to learn how to keep it functioning besides that, how to keep your mind in work, how to keep your mind in other things. And a lot of time people think that because you are there or because you are doing something, you are not feeling that much pain, or you are not like you are exaggerating something. So how do you deal with what you're feeling and the social side about how people see your pain and treat your pain?
I can answer that. I think that I think that what I was gonna say is maybe touches on both of those things, but I think that for me, like the pain, like the nucleus of like the other circles that radiate out from it, the pain is like the easier part. Maybe aside from when it isn't like super like 10 out of 10, but like I think like the hardest part for me, because the pain will always like come back on different days, is constructing a life that is reliable enough, or like just like building around the uncertainty sometimes feels impossible socially, like professionally sometimes. And I think just like that, and then finding the words for the specific types of pains that I have that are often like neurological in nature, that often rely on very strange metaphors to communicate what is actually going on. So yeah, I just think that like sometimes the pain is one thing, but like the secondary pain and the layers on top of it that have to do more with functioning in life, that is what is really hard for me when it just is chronic.
I feel similarly, especially with the describing pain with weird metaphors. I feel like it's like trying to explain color to someone who's been blind all their life. It's like you can't explain something that abstract and subjective. It's really, really difficult. And a lot of the time, I have a hard time expressing how I think and feel all the time. And I'm constantly convinced that no one understands what I'm saying. And so I just talk a lot. But it's especially hard when it's something like that, where it's like, I wish it was possible to like airdrop thoughts and feelings to other people, because it feels impossible to put into words sometimes. But I think that in terms of just managing the unpredictability and the lack of understanding and fully connecting with it of other people, that's something that I also struggle with, and I'm kind of slowly breaking out of that pattern. I often feel like I'm inconveniencing the people around me, or making them like bend over backwards to accommodate me in my conditions, and like during flare-ups and things like that. And it's, even when people are being understanding about it, it's just so difficult. And I think that if someone doesn't extend that grace and acceptance to you, then they're not a person that is deserving of you trying to prove yourself to them. And I know that life isn't full of, you can't choose to only ever be around people who fully understand and accept you. But I think that if you are keeping someone in your life and you are close with a person who does not make an effort to understand your pain, even if it's completely foreign to them, and this doesn't even only apply to pain, this applies to everything. If someone doesn't make an effort to understand you, even if it's difficult for them, then they shouldn't, I don't think you should try so hard to keep them in your life, because if they care enough about you, they will give you that grace of attempting to understand.
Curious when you're, oh, sorry.
No. Actually, I kind of curious about your perspective too, because I mean, I have read what you have done, and to me, it's like mind blowing. I run 10 meters, and my heart is getting out of my lungs, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. So I think that you also have this kind of feeling like people sometimes might think that it's easy when they see what you can do, like, oh, he gets tired and that's it, and don't realize through everything that your body go to achieve the things that you have achieved. And also like your perspective about how do you understand people that go under those conditions. So like, how is that for you, like in different scenarios?
Well, at first, I definitely don't want to discount anyone's pain from what they experience, because I have a different experience, and a lot of things I do I inflict upon myself. So first thing I would like to say is I don't have like a genetic predisposition to be able to do the things I do. In fact, when I first started, I was like the character Chunk in Goonies, and like I couldn't run to the end of my road. So it was an evolution. I've been doing this long distance running for 28 years, and like fortunately, I have zero pain whatsoever, like right now. And but I'm super methodical about a lot of things I do. And one thing I loved about what you said was the first thing you said is that you're looking at like the dietitian elements as well as the therapy elements. And like, I love that because I hear very, very few doctors speak to that, even though that is one of the greatest culprits in America. It's the average human living in America today. Like the food we eat is the number one impact initially in terms of like inflammation. So if you have like inflammation, for example, like I've done stuff this week that's already crazy for the average person, thinking like, man, I would not be wanting to run like 100 miles in this 1 week. But I don't feel any discomfort. I go run 20 miles, the next day I'll feel like nothing. Even I'm 48 years of age. And it's not like, it's because what I eat is one of the elements. I also go and see a guy named Mr. Miyagi. So he has these machines here. I'm like so fascinated by it because he has like some machines today. He has got 4 machines, and he's got like a laser. He's got like a radio shockwave machine and 2 other machines. And it's incredible because a lot of times if I'm having some sort of area of discomfort, whether it's like my hamstring was like 3 weeks ago, maybe like anything you can imagine, he oftentimes fixes it like within 2 visits with these machines today. So it's fascinating to me just how that's evolved. There's other things like music, like that's really powerful. If I'm like running 450 miles, just the act of listening to music during those periods where I'm feeling discomfort can alleviate it. And another big element is breathing. Like, so breathing is really fascinating, but like I can breathe, and like the breathing, you relax your body, and you can also like your focus is a big thing. So, I mean, I'm not someone who's saying like no medication whatsoever. I had a dermatology appointment last week and they took off a mole, did like local anesthesia. But during that process, I'm like, I wouldn't want to look at the needle. And I also I always do this thing where I like kind of squeeze my hand, like take my focus away from something else. And it's like your mental focus. It's incredible how you can with some of these methods for maybe the average American or human living in our time, you can really have some dramatic impacts on their overall sensation and experiences. But again, it's not like for everybody, but I do see like there's some more things that you've probably gotten into. I'd love to hear what you have to say on that.
Sure. So yeah, my part on personal side, I have experienced pain too. Again, not to the level, but I used to have a lot of chronic neck pain. Mostly, I think might have had trigger points because I would carry all my stress in my neck. And I don't know, as I grew up, it kind of got better. So part of it, I do feel, I've been told I might have hypermobility. So I feel like part of it might have been that. And we know kids actually, teenagers get affected worse than adults. So that period is really hard in their life. In terms of the patients I see, it is really hard. One of the toughest parts of my job is explaining what these kids have. And when they come to me, explaining what they have, because they come to me.
Just a little louder.
Sure.
I'm probably the oldest one here.
Yeah, of course.
No worries. No worries.
Just a little louder.
One of the most challenging part of my job is explaining to these children what the problem is. Because what I treat is disorders of gut-brain interaction, meaning that nothing is wrong inside the GI tract. Structurally, everything is normal. But they have severe pain. They can't move, they can't eat. And it's very difficult to explain this when all the tests are coming back normal. And the biggest scare they have is, oh, I have cancer. I have something that is being missed. Every doctor looks at this and says, they do more tests and everything comes normal. Most of my job is really explaining this process, that there are nerves in your GI tract, which are like your brain. In fact, we like to call this the big brain, and that's the little brain. And the same imbalances that you have in a migraine is what belly pain would do. And then, when you conceptualize that there's not a single test that's going to diagnose a migraine, people understand that better. But many times what happens is when they hear nothing is wrong, but they hear. So the first thing they tell me is, so do you think this is all in my head? And I've hundreds and hundreds of children come and tell me the same thing. My doctor thinks this is all in my head. And if they go home with such a negative connotation of that, and sometimes it's like, you have 15-minute practices, you don't have time. It's so much easier to just scope someone and do this instead of actually go and talk about you could have this or you could have this. I think we can do it, a scope, an endoscopy, and look if everything is normal. But we know that this is really a condition that exists. What they always think is it's a diagnosis of exclusion, and then the acceptability is really hard. The other thing that has been told to some of the patients is they're ridiculed at school. School has been a huge burden. They're unable to go eat out with their friends for fear that they're going to have pain or nausea. They're unable to participate in sports. It really takes over their life. A kid who was a great soccer player is now, would compete at the state level, cannot move. Or what you mentioned about functioning, like it really, really hones deep. There was a dancer that I treated who could not dance, and then when she got better, we did a whole piece on how, she had her, she used to perform competitively. So I think a lot goes into it, and it's again to what you said. It's a very integrative approach. There's not one way you could treat it or the other, and that's why we have been looking at more ways a lot. And this is not just to abdominal pain. There are other disciplines that children who do for migraine, for example, they have the same approach. Or we have something called FIRST, which is a functional independence restorative program, where the goal is on functioning. A little bit to what you said about the layers of pain. In research, what we do is call it pain intensity and pain unpleasantness. So pain is not one dimension. It's so multi-dimensional. There is a sensory aspect to it. There is an emotional aspect to it. And sometimes people just get stuck on the number. but there are so many other layers to think of. I was just while I was driving here, I was listening to one of the podcasts on neuromodulation where they were looking at what should be outcomes of pain, and this is the International Neuromodulation Society. So the message was exactly this: pain intensity is just one thing. We should be looking at composite. How do you make a patient better? Okay, if a drug or a device makes 30% pain better by FDA standards, what does that really mean to a patient's life? Is it going to change what they do on a day-to-day basis? So making that impact of how are these treatments going to make you better? And we integrate everything. We refer to acupuncture. We have neuromodulation. We look at diet. We look at aromatherapy. We've integrated acupressure. My husband's actually here, and he works a little bit in the acupuncture space. So he's a dietitian. So we live what we speak, kind of thing. So I think it's that time and age where I think it's time to make the East meet the West and kind of start looking at the body as a whole in a whole person directed approach. The other issue is they will come to me thinking something's wrong with the gut, but there are so many other things they struggle with. Looking at dizziness, they have autonomic dysfunction. So most of my talk is how the gut and the brain are connected, and how this is more of an autonomic dysfunction. And it's not because these kids are scared. They've seen 7 people. They've seen a cardiologist for POTS. They've seen a neurologist for migraine. They've seen me. They've seen rheumatologist for joint pains. Every time they go, they get a new big, I call them DGBI. Another person will give them another diagnosis. And they're like, what is wrong with me? I'm just why can't I just be like the next teenager there? So sometimes just explaining that there is one central physiologic problem and not so many just helps them conceptualize better, takes some of that relief off. And then I think there is an element we've been looking at, which is pain catastrophizing. Once the pain starts, pain causes more pain. So if you get into that cycle, it becomes really hard to break it. And then if you can break that cycle even a little bit, then I think it's like it got worse and then it's going to get better. So focusing a lot of that, some of the work you mentioned about when you listen to music, that is the gating of pain theory. So normally all signals are going to the spinal cord, and there's gates and mechanisms to take that up, and there are layers. So you could essentially block signals coming from the nociceptive signals that are coming by increasing signals from other parts of the body, eyes, ears, breathing. And I think we use that quite a bit in treating these patients. This is not just distraction, it's also a mechanism by you can heal pain.
Can I take the husband reference as a segue? Of course. I just want to say, I have so much to talk about. I was an athlete, I was a wrestler, so pushing yourself to the limit, definitely identify with that. I remember being in a match and just not being able to breathe. And then you're in overtime, and I'm just like, how the heck am I going to get through 2 more rounds of this? I can't breathe right now. So definitely there's a mental aspect. And just in general, this I wish this was televised, because there's so much junk on TV. We were talking about how to get other people to understand your pain. I think pain makes a person so much more empathetic. If you don't have any pain, you're just going to go around in life and you can just be a jerk to everyone and not try to understand, if you never feel how pain is, it's hard to sometimes be empathetic. I wasn't doing anything athletic for a long time, and then all of a sudden I started training for a 5K for the pig. And all of a sudden I had so much more respect for all the people running down my street who looked miserable. I always looked like, I get it. I forgot for a long time. I made notes because I don't want to forget anything. You're talking about food. I'm a dietitian, so definitely I agree that food can really help with pain. I worked at a pain management clinic in New Orleans. But actually, I'm just about to publish a book right now, and if it was done, I swear I would have brought a free copy for everyone. But I think I actually linked up with someone to help give me a graphic designer to get my last graphic done, so I can finally get it done. But it's called The New Health Consciousness, because basically at 19, I thought I was so healthy, all the doctors and all the King's men, I did all the tests and everything was normal. I had no energy. I felt like death every single day. And it was hard. I couldn't get anybody to believe me. I worked at a banquet hall, so naturally everybody thought I just did drugs. You know, it's always a server, you know, he's always out of it. You know.
Or like it's depression.
Yeah, or he's
something like
depressed.
that.
So at age 19, I was 225 pounds solid muscle, but I had so much pain, back pain, neck pain. I had no energy. And finally, I found acupuncture, and I found yoga, and I found thinking positively, and I found eating more traditionally, like whole foods, not just food products. And after everything I did, I started to feel better. And I just like went from death to bursting with energy. And now I started a health center with acupuncturists and yoga and holistic health center because I felt the pain of suffering, having bad health, having no energy, you know, and I just wanted to help everybody I could. So I think a lot of things today are preventable, but we have a lot of people with these gadgets, right? And they come out and they're like, oh, this is alternative, and you know, here, wave this magic wand. It's not that simple, you know. You have to get your body back in balance. So I think a lot of things are preventable now, and instead of always looking at technology, we need to look back, like using acupuncture, but in technology to stimulate the ear, the acupuncture points to help with pain, like you know, Dr. Santucci is. And I think, yeah, that was all my points.
So I've heard something come up a couple times, and that it's about expressing your pain to other people. I've been to the doctor with pain and been asked to, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is very little pain and 10 is the worst pain you can imagine, how bad is this? And I say, I have a very vivid imagination. 10 sounds real bad. I don't know. 3, I don't know. Like, I have no basis for this, right? And so, of course, if you're being treated regularly, you're basing against your own scale. But how do we relate to other people's pain? Is my 3 your 6? And what does it mean if pain is burning or tingling or all of these words that we're asked to use? And it feels very difficult to express your pain to somebody else in a way they can understand. So I don't know, what are some approaches that you can think of that, how do we relate to each other? Or can we? Is this hopeless that we could ever truly empathize with somebody else's pain?
Well, I am an artist, and that's something that I've used to get through pretty much everything in my life. I'm currently going to NKU majoring in visual communication design, but I've been doing art stuff kind of my whole life. And over the summer, I worked with artworks, and I made an art installation and a series of photographs called Horror Reality. And it was about my experience living with chronic pain, using nature as a metaphor for that, because I liked the implications of nature sometimes growing in spite of itself and being something that's so uncontrollable, but yet so like omnipresent and like beautiful and complex. And that's kind of how I view my own body. And I think that that's the best that I've ever expressed how I felt, like in my entire life. And it's also the coolest art thing I've ever done. And I'm really proud of myself for it. But I had a lot of people who I know come up to me during the opening of this exhibition, and it was a group exhibition. So there were other artists that I worked with. Their work was also in the same gallery. But I had a lot of people I know come up to me and just talk to me about my experience with pain and their experience. And it made me realize that putting all of these feelings into my art made people in my life who I'm super close with understand a part of me that they've never been able to understand before, or that I've never been able to express to them before, even though I'm really close with them. Like, something that I did in one of my pieces is that I went through my medical records from when I was very young, because I have like an 800-page PDF on my computer of all of those to get my disability accommodations at NKU. And I was reading some of the notes from my appointments before I got diagnosed with all my chronic conditions. And it was just like, I kept thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like these notes are so mean. Like, these people were acting like I was being so dramatic, and I wasn't. And so I collaged all of these statements like, oh, they'll dig in their heels, or they'll start hysterically screaming, and they over dramatize over images of centipedes on a log. And it was a series of photos where, as you went on, there would be more and more bugs on the log. I don't know, very conceptual. But my friend Ray came up to me and was like, are these like real things that people wrote about you? And I was like, yeah, they're my medical records from when I was 6 years old. And she just like started crying out of empathy. And it was weird, because that's an experience that stuck with me, because I think that is might be the most understood that I've felt by someone without having to just explain to them and have them see for years and years of being around me how it affects me. So yeah, all that to say, I do art, and it's cool, and it helps me express myself. I'd be interested to hear more about what you were talking about with the different approaches to a pain scale, and like intensity versus unpleasantness, because I'm really interested in some more complex approaches to describing pain with words, because that's something that I struggle with.
I have a quick question on that. When you mentioned nature, what inspired you to pick nature?
I've always felt very connected with it. When I was born, so I'm non-binary, I changed my name to Finley, but my mom had me because she had a dream that she found a baby named Lily in a garden, and so my birth name was Lily. And I think that is one of the reasons I've always felt connected with nature, because I've always felt inherently like by my name, and kind of this weird dream that in a way brought me into existence, that I've always kind of been a part of it. But nature is also something that over the past year that I've struggled with both my physical health issues and really bad depression. Appreciating the world around me is something that's helped me a lot. And that's what got me into photography. And that's why it was like an installation of a bunch of photography pieces. So whenever I don't know, just, it sounds like stereotypical, and people are always like, oh, well, have you tried like going outside and looking at the sun and going for a walk, and maybe all your problems will go away? And it's never that, but I think that being connected with the outside world and getting fresh air and sunlight and just being around things that make you feel at peace is something that helps so much and has helped me so much. So beyond just all the metaphorical meanings behind it that I talked about before, it's just something that I've always connected with and something that's always made me feel better.
That's what I thought. I think nature therapy, essentially, like, there is guided imagery, which is where you do scenarios when you're in pain, you look at the beach, or, whatever someone can conceptualize and make them better. So I was curious if that made a difference. And we've been trying to explore more virtual reality guided mindfulness. So the aurora, the northern lights, which are so popular this year. Just virtually conceptualizing that and seeing if pain improves or not, just as ways for kids to engage more in behavioral treatments. But coming back to your question then about the pain scales, that's a hard one, right? Like, because someone's 3 may not be another person's 7. And then I've had kids who come and tell me they are in 10 on 10 pain, but they look pretty comfortable. But so it's, for us, I've had so many people say, 10 on 10 pain, but you're texting, but maybe you do and maybe you don't. It's really hard to how that is, and I don't think we have a good way of really ascertaining that at all, even till date. What we have started using is more visual analog scales. So people can it's really hard if you've been in 9 out of 10 pain all throughout to really know if something is going to make that. Like if I start a treatment, is that 9 going to move at all? So we do what you mentioned about colors. We have a sliding scale, has the number on the back, but you slide to the intensity you feel, to the unpleasantness you feel, and then that changes more than just the number, and you can actually see, because it's really 100 millimeter in each change instead of just an 8 or a 9. You can really to the T tell how much that numbers are changing. And then coming to pain intensity and unpleasantness, it's that concept of how can there be pleasant pain and unpleasant pain? But really, like childbirth is an example of pleasant pain, or so it's like how you even conceptualize or emotionalize pain. You could have a different perception of how you feel it. So we are trying to understand a little bit more along those dimensions, and how do we capture all of this when we talk about pain.
Sometimes it brings a euphoria, like in the sense of like I've been running a race and falling asleep, and I fall down and it just knocks me down. I'm like, oh, I feel this sharp pain, and it just like bolts me back to life, and I'm like getting mad. I'm like curious, and I'm like, all right, now we're going. It just brings right back into it. But I definitely really love what you said about nature. I mean, nature, I feel, is a really powerful healer. And I think that's another thing, getting back to like a lot of where we are as a country and a civilization, and thinking about, a lot of people don't get a lot of time outdoors these days. Like that for me, when I broke my neck and I was hospitalized for about 4 or 5 days, they sent me home. While I was hospitalized, I had painkillers, but they sent me home with like a big giant jar of Oxycontin. And I like said from like the first moment, and that my personal experience where I was at that time, I wasn't going to take any of that, and I felt a lot of pain. But I started like walking to work, and like the wild thing about it, like the walking was therapeutic. So, like one of my big principles, if I go run a 100-mile race, the next day I walk at least 20 minutes or do some like very gentle run, because number one, I can tell is motion is lotion. So I find that I'm in way more discomfort if I just sit in a static position. Like the yoga, I love that you mentioned that. Like yoga is super powerful for like also like helping with those things, and it's all tied together.
Did you say that you fell asleep while you were running?
Yeah. Because I run for so many days. The one race was like 4.5 days, and I didn't sleep until the 4th day. So like the 4th night, I would fall asleep a little bit, and then I did fall and like fell down and got back up.
So is it like slowly dozing off? You just pass out?
No, usually it's like I'll just fall asleep for like a little microsecond.
Oh, okay.
And I'll wake up. But like, in some instance where I like literally fall asleep for like a second, I'll lose balance on this, like trip over something.
You worded it to sound really alarming.
Yeah, no, it was like nothing happened to me. It was fine overall.
I just wanted to add one thing.
Yeah.
I gotta go. Then I gotta put the kids to sleep. So.
Yeah.
But about nature is healing. I love finding the technology and the research to back up the traditional, the natural healing practices. But what I'm finding is, and what I talk about in the book, is that the electrons that is mostly the healing part of nature. Like the sun gives us energy, the fresh air. Naturally, we all know, I think, inherently, that go outside and get some fresh air. It's just going to help us feel better, especially if we're going through some, difficult time, stress or pain or whatever. Fresh air and feeling the ground, earthing, basically walking barefoot like everybody used to, but now it's called earth, got a special term now. But it's really the electrons and getting those electrons. One thing I forgot about the diet was, the other thing I'm finding is they can test the charge of food. And the more natural food, it has a higher charge. So they're in the more alkaline food, we hear about alkaline all the time, it's because there's antioxidants. And then you have the acidic food, those have more of the free radicals. So they're taking electrons versus giving electrons. So the body's electric and the nature is really giving us that electricity. It's helping us fuel us. I have the kids a bit.
We got a hand up.
Yeah, my name's Steve Doler. I'm with the DAPS Industrial Design Program, and there's a new branch of design that's starting to happen. It's called biophilic design, and it's bringing nature in, and it's proving to be very beneficial now that we have so many people that are going to be working remotely and are graduating and working remotely, and they're always in one place. And we're seeing a lot of new health injuries and conditions coming up from sedentary work styles, and also the fact that somebody wakes up in a room, they work in a room, they watch TV in a room, and they go to sleep in a room and never leave the inside. So, those are different areas of big pain that are down the pipeline for our society and the workforce. And one of the things that they're doing is bringing nature in and finding ways to do that. So,
I have one quote to maybe mention based on your original question. And I don't know if anyone else has heard it, but it's from Elaine Scarry, and she said that to have pain is to have certainty, but to hear that another person has pain is to have doubt. And I think that is a very interesting thing to think about, that maybe the lack of having good scales, quantitative scales, or even multidimensional ones, we may just be coming up against something with pain that is just fundamentally sometimes impossible to communicate. And I think about that a lot, and how much metaphor might play a role or not play a role in things. So yeah, I don't know. That's what I was thinking about.
do you want to know? Do you want people to know that you're in pain?
Yeah, because I think that it's it's important data, because if I'm just kind of acting super sluggish, I want people to know why. But yeah, I think that usually I do, because it feels like just another part of who I am. I don't know how you feel about it.
No, I agree. I don't, it makes me really upset when people don't recognize or understand that I'm in pain, because I think it's such an integral part of just how I experience life. Like I said before, it gives me the same feeling as when you're, I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, or if I'm just being an edgy teenager right now, but if you're hanging out with your friends and you're kind of sad, but you don't want to say anything, and you're waiting for someone to notice, but no one notices. That's what it kind of feels like, being in pain, but not being able to describe it, or not having other people understand it or recognize it. It's just upsetting to me.
I have a question, I think more for Catherine. So something that,
Can you speak up?
yeah, I can. So both of you have told about your medical reports, how they were traumatizing that. And historically, we have the doctors dealing with pain different, and we have a bias between how they treat pain, men and women. We have the hysteria in women. So if you're feeling pain, you're just being dramatic. You're just trying to get attention. You're just trying to do a lot of different things that most of what we know today about pain and how our body functions comes from male bodies. So I would like to hear from you more like a historical approach. If you true like you got like some tools that they have used and how this reflects how they were dealing with pain back then and how this.
So this conversation about being understood and being able to communicate your pain, from my position as a curator, it made me think back to patent medicines. So exploded in popularity post-Civil War, and they were basically these tonics and elixirs, these medicinal compounds, these vegetable compounds, and essentially they were like some roots and herbs juiced up with alcohol, cocaine, opiates, morphine, heroin, all these things. Basically, they were just juiced up. And they really exploded in popularity because they became accessible and they were fairly inexpensive. So medicine back then, this is going to sound familiar, was very expensive, prohibitively so. Little Americans didn't have access to doctors. And these patent medicines came out and you could buy them over the counter. They were unregulated, ingredients were unregulated, claims were unregulated. I mean, you look at the list on what these things will cure and you think, it's God in a bottle. And you could get them over the counter, but you could get them by mail order. And one of the demographics, the opioid epidemic we're in currently, we had one before, and it was in the 19th century. Patent medicines, one of the largest affected demographics because of patent medicines for opioid addiction was women, because of the stigma of talking about their bodies, talking about health. The doctors were mostly men. They were dismissive and insensitive to their issues, their concerns, dismissive of their treatments, being hysterical. A lot of medical science at the time kind of pinpointed what they would call female complaints or menstrual disorders or disabilities around the uterus and stuff like this. And so just completely dismissive. And so for women, buying via mail order these elixirs and these tonics that promise to cure all their ills, which, given the amount of opioids in them, would for a little while, temporary relief. But a lot of what was driving that dependency through these medicines was not listening to women and not understanding women, or the stigma of women just talking about their bodies. It's still bad now, and we're still dismissed now in the medical profession. So go back, to the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and just kind of compound that with stigma and shame in talking about your body and your illness is an issue. So from a historical perspective, the driver of one of our first opioid epidemics was in some way gendered by driving women to these secret tonics and elixirs instead of seeking legitimate medical treatment. So there are historical roots in a lot of seeking pain medicine or pain relief through various means, non-traditional ways. So that's when everybody keeps saying, how do you make yourself heard? Nobody's listening to me, or how do they understand? Just from a historical perspective, I immediately went to women in these patent medicines, and that was their little secret. That's how they were able to find pain relief.
I'm going to make a quick comment on the gender differences that I see. So yes, about 75% of patients who deal with chronic pain conditions through my pain researchers that I collaborate with, and then in my clinics are women or females, and then about it's a larger percentage compared to men. But what I've also seen, and again, there can be ways of mostly around puberty, peripubertal age that it starts. So we're looking into, are there any sex hormonal differences. That's what's going on. There are some researchers who are doing animal model work into this to see pain, sex differences in pain. Or is it related to more just women internalize their pain more, and some of the behavioral aspect of it instead of externally expressing it. But the other part, which is very not new, or I've been talking about it in the last year, is this is just an observation from my studies, because I'm looking at sleep architecture and affecting pain. And we're recruiting. I've had like 50, 60 patients now. Guess how many men I have in that study? Boys I have in that study.
One.
Got close.
And yes, and controls, I get many. It's a very half and half. But pain patients, I'm getting 2. And then I started looking at why am I not getting these people? What's happening with men? So they are actually going into my exclusion criteria because they're either suicidal or they're so dysfunctional and disabled that they cannot participate in pain. So the myth that women are more hysterical than men might not be true after all. Like at the end of the day, I'm actually concerned for the boys who are getting it because they're really getting worse. But I think we have to somehow debunk that mythology that it's all hysteria or it's in there, because when it affects men, it's really affecting them in a way that they're worse than what I'm seeing with females in terms of functioning. That was just a very observation, and I started digging more and started asking more. And we're like, this is, and we started looking at the numbers of suicidal ideation, and we're like, we wouldn't have thought that. That is not what it's so contrary to what popular belief would think.
I'm curious.
I had a question about that, and actually kind of around personal related. We're having a conversation in a circle, and maybe it's a bit of like a language thing, maybe it's like a values thing, but the man on the panel doesn't use the word pain, right? So there is like a way of talking that is, it's men aren't just necessary. I mean, men were the practitioners back then; they were denying women's pain, but I feel like men deny the existence of pain and have maybe been using the narrativistic approach for longer, albeit against other people as well as themselves. So like there's maybe something going on there. And I was wondering whether or not you've had experience where you're talking to a clinician. Have you noticed more males having to be convinced the thing that they're experiencing is pain as opposed to better described with some other expression or some other thing?
It's interesting. I think I've had definitely when like a 17-year-old male comes to see me for the first time, they will be a little bit less talkative, and their parents are probably probing more. Usually mom is talking more about it. And then I have to like really dig the words in and get the words out. But I've had similar experiences with teenage females too. So it's not always I could say more on that narrative that they don't talk about their pain. But you might be true in some sense. I really have to like bring on some words because they'll be very focused, like little words coming out of, I have pain, yes. What type of pain? When? And, I have to do more leading questions versus nots. They might be true, but it's not always the case. I've had the same instance with females too now where some of them are so shut down by the time they see me, but some of them are like, what's this fifth doctor going to do different than what the 4 have told me already? Like, this is a waste of my time. I'm here again. I've been told to come. So sometimes it's all those emotions are like shut down. There is legit medical trauma too. Like if they've undergone testing over testing, that whole experience of coming to a hospital might not be or a clinic might not be a very pleasant one. But that's I'm going to pay more attention to that now.
I had a couple of things that I wanted to ask. I can take the opportunity since the foot's in the door. I thought it was interesting, and maybe this is a bit of an observation, but I wanted to see whether or not you agree with this. When you were talking about your installation, sorry, I didn't catch your name, so I would address it. Say again.
Finley.
Finley.
Yes.
You mentioned your installation and the use of nature, and we talk about nature and beauty and sort of like healing property of nature, but I sometimes think too, there's a quote from Werner Herzog when he's in the jungle where he talks about the fact that it's easy to romanticize the sounds of the jungle, but it's actually that nature is crying out in pain, and that there is an intent, and you're actually in the presence of intense murder and suffering. And we don't necessarily think of it that way. And I think there's a duality there. And it's almost like when we talk about nature, when we think about nature, nature's less nature itself, and it's symbolic of a thing that the human brain and language can do to perspective, the same way that we're able to translate the sounds of nature and the presence of all of that pain into something very beautiful. Seems simultaneous in the way that people are talking about their perspectives on pain. I think we've got a divide on the panel, sort of, although it's not perfect, between clinician and experiencer of pain. And there's a pretty strong undercurrent of this idea of whether or not pain is something that should be prevented, or if pain is something that gets sublimated into meaning, whether or not it's art or accomplishing something with sport or making big decisions in life. I just wanted to know two things, basically, so I'll wrap it up. But the main thing is, how do you settle the tension between the clinical perspective on pain, the cessation of pain, versus the sort of existential, often post hoc, but also deeply meaningfully attached relation to pain, where it does seem to be the source of a lot of art, culture, meaning, self-identity. What's the line there, and how do you all think about it from your particular vantage?
Well, I think for me, going back to what I kind of said at the very beginning of all of this, that like if I could snap my fingers and get rid of like all of my conditions, I don't think I would, not because they don't like totally negatively affect me, because they do, but because I would have such a different outlook on life, and I would be such a different person. I would have such a different personality, such different friends and interests and experiences if I didn't live the life that I am living because of all of these things. And I think that a lot of people who have any sort of lifelong issue, whether or not it's pain or whether or not it's physical pain, would have the same thought. Not everyone, but I think a lot of people would. And I think that there's this idea that we need to, cure all these things and prevent them all no matter what. And I think that does apply to, things that are completely untreatable and uncurable, or like usually terminal, things like that. But when it comes to, treatable mental illnesses or disabilities, cognitive or physical or chronic conditions, I think that it's more just the world that needs to change rather than trying to cure people. Because I do think that a lot of people have gained perspective and identity and personal experience from these struggles to the point that trying to get rid of every thing like that, every possible condition and every possible thing that could cause pain, I think it would be denying a lot of people their own experience of finding strength or embracing parts of who they are, if that makes sense.
It's really powerful way of saying it. And I love your statements that really get my mind going, and it brought me to a place of reflecting on my own experience. And what I'm doing, the reason I do these really difficult events is because I feel this opportunity to like peel back layers within myself, and this sense of self-discovery. and a higher connection with like things in the universe, like whether it be God or whatever you want to call it, nature. So I don't feel like I could get to those places without having to go through those walls of discomfort and challenge in my personal experience.
Yeah, and I think I feel pretty similar to you of like, often it's not that I'm seeking my pain to go away, but seeking an understanding and a place at the table, like a way to participate in the world, even with the pain, which is hard when you're kind of trying to fit into the structures of everyone else. And I think that for me, living undiagnosed for several years really just gives me a constant need to just like know why, like where the pain is coming from, what's the science behind it. And I think that sometimes I think doctors want to give me a treatment and I'm like, no, tell me like what's going on. I'm super interested. And not all patients are like that, but that's been really important to me with my journey.
Yeah, no, I feel similarly. I'm not going to talk for super long about this because I want them to be able to answer, but I think that in my experience, being able to understand and manage my own pain is really what my goal is rather than just getting rid of it entirely. Like, I want to be able to live with it and live normally and happily in the world without just completely never experiencing it again, you know?
I could hear you talk all day. Really, go on. No, it's been such an enriching experience to hear this, though. And what I have seen is different people have different goals. So that's where I think part of our clinic has actually become very, it's just become a national thing, and people come to us from all across the world. We ranked #1 in GI for the DGBI component of things too, was one of the ranking items. Was really what we are trying to do is shared decision making and goals. I try to reflect sometimes, what am I doing different? Like, what I think we're just all coming together, and that's what patients have said too. What we see here has been different at other places, which is something we should, all as being in Cincinnati, be proud of the society we are living in. Is people are trying to come together. It's not a one-person job. It's not like in really we have to meet the patients where they are. Because I could just sit in a room and say, okay, you came to me. It makes my job so easy. You told me everything. I let you talk for 5 minutes. Take Linsess, go home. See you in 3 months. I could be seeing like 40 patients a day, and my RVUs would be so great. But was that right? No, because not this. It's very personalized. What one person may want, because the wants are very different. I've had some patients who really want to get rid of pain, and then I want to help to meet them there because they really just the way it is. Then I've had patients who will actually do what I say. I think, why is it so important for the pain to be 0? That's where we start talking about functioning, because you're coming to me with 9 out of 10 pain. What if this treatment didn't work? But what did not work? You were able to go to school, but the pain didn't become 0. But now you're able to participate in sports. So what is meaningful to you? If the 8 can become a 4, or even 5, it's a 3-point change. But now you're able to do some of the things you were not able to do before and manage that pain. So I think I've like a very diverse group, and it's really hard to generalize who wants what. So I think what their expectations of pain are, we as a group need to meet together. We as physicians need to do a better job at communicating too. So really the cardiologist talks to the neurologist, talks to the physical therapist, talks to the rehab, and it's hard. I know it's not easy, but it's like polypharmacy, that's become such a huge problem. Sometimes when they come to me, they come on 30 medicines. My role is actually to decrease them and not increase them, because I'm like, which of these is actually working for you? We looked at our sleep outcomes in children who had abdominal pain, and then the ones who were actually on all these, one of the reviewer questions was, what are these medications doing? Because these medications, some of the psychotropic medications help sleep. They were, guess what? The ones who were on more medicines had worse sleep compared to the ones without. How do you even think about that? Maybe because you're so disabled and you're a more severe phenotype, and that's why you're probably having those issues. So sometimes you really want to cut, I'm doing the opposite of what you would think. And then we make it a very personalized approach. These are the things, what is your goals? My first question really is two questions, because people are coming to me from different angles. They might have seen someone is, what is your understanding of being here today? And believe me or not, there are people who will tell me, I don't know. I'm like, okay, what did they say? And we just said, see another doctor. So sometimes just what is your understanding? What diagnosis has been given to you? That's a very popular one. 50% don't know what they have, and they've seen 5 doctors. And then what are your goals? Like, what are you expecting from this? So I think what you mentioned about goals is so real to ask about. And then really, if you won't do what I tell you, you're not going to get better. So we really have to work together. There was a very nice study published in Adults for a big clinical trial where they looked at early and delayed placebo response. And what they found was really that those shared decision making and provider-patient agreement was actually one of the key factors for a placebo response. So, sometimes half the battle is done if your patient is actually willing to take the treatment that you want, and then your outcomes are more successful. Something we were talking about, right? Like if you can make them accept it, the efficacy becomes better of the device. So.
Well, we have gone over time, which I think is probably not a big surprise. This has been an amazing conversation, and I thank you all for your incredible perspective. I'm going to be around cleaning up chairs and hanging out for a little bit. And so if there's more questions, if people would like to know more about our gallery that we recently opened, please feel free to come up to me and ask. And thank you again so much for everything you've shared tonight. And thank you all.